I'm live right now, so we'll see what happens. Apparently, I don't know how to be a libertarian, so I'm going to get schooled on that, I guess. So there's this whole Twitter thing going on right now. Somebody doesn't like libertarianism, is telling us we don't explain our beliefs well, but hasn't offered any kind of actual criticism, just saying we're not explaining it well. I'm like, well, what aren't we explaining well? I'm not hearing any legit criticisms yet, so I can't really I don't understand like who you're talking to or what your previous experience is because you're just being extremely vague. I sent them a DM. They said they're going to join, so I guess we'll see what happens. Uh, yeah, so we'll see what happens. If you're in the chat, if anybody's in the chat and wants to chime in, go for it. I'm going to send a link out on Twitter for this for everybody to join or to watch. Let's see. I gotta open up my Twitter mensch thingies. Shit. Oh yeah. What the fuck is going on with this? Yeah, he still hasn't joined yet. He says he's going to. We'll see what happens. But yeah, like if you're gonna go, first off, it all stemmed from me posting this meme of like Trump like going like this, and then there's this picture of like looks like he's like touching Kanye West's nipples. It's just a stupid meme we made just to be goofy, and then apparently because of that, libertarians are idiots and don't. We're all failures because of this. So yeah, I had nothing better to do right now, and I figured, what the fuck.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes. What should I address you as?
Yeah,
You said you can't say your name, so
you could just say my username, man. It's
I
fine.
don't have that up. I can't see what your username
Oh,
is.
fuck.
I'm on something else right now.
Oh, that's fine. Let me. You just say Lewis.
Lewis? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. How you doing, man?
Well, it's 12:30 here. What time is it where you're at?
Oh, fuck. It's 1 p.m. 1:30 p.m.
1:30 p.m. Okay, so you're in like the middle of the day. Well,
Yeah.
first of all, I will say I do appreciate you actually coming onto the stream. I did not
No, that's
expect you
fine.
to do that, so I do appreciate you taking that much. Um, I will say,
Just so you know, I give you a little bit of crap on there, but I do enjoy your tweets. Just so you know. Otherwise,
okay. Well,
yeah.
here's the thing. Like, I'm not gonna come at you all angry. All right. But
That's
I
fine.
do want to say, if you kind of you said that we're not explaining. I don't know who you've talked to previously as far as libertarianism goes. If you feel like there is a specific point, because that was my frustration in the exchange was you're saying we're not explaining it well, and I'm like, well, I don't know what you mean, because first of all, a lot of people there's a lot of different aspects of libertarianism. There's minarchists, there's anacaps, there's
Yeah, yeah,
straight
yeah.
anarchists. I don't know what sects you're talking about. I don't know what arguments you're talking about. I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm willing to go into it. You made a comment that it's too close to, what was it? Or something like, I don't know if your argument was, because I'm guessing you're conservative.
Oh no. I I get a lot of crap from conservatives as well as I guess the conservative wing of the party that you would like put people like Charlie Kirk, Ben Shapiro, people like that. I get a lot of crap from them too.
Well, how would you identify yourself, if I may
Oh,
ask?
I would say I put
If you
myself
don't mind
more in
putting a label
line
on
with.
it.
Well, let me think here. Probably a traditionalist, nationalist would be the closest definition that I could think of.
Okay.
I
Okay.
wouldn't.
Are you a Trump supporter?
I like him. I don't think he's perfect by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, I don't think any. Well, I won't say that. We have seen people like literally say he was chosen by God. So there are some people who really do think he's perfect. But,
yeah.
I would hope
there's some people like that are a bit crazy about that. I do admit that with libertarians. However, I think that they are overly critical of him in a lot of ways.
Well, here's the thing.
I think actually unfairly critical. I wouldn't say it's not. Your guys are good about criticizing him, and I think it's good to keep people's feet to the fire. But I think sometimes a lot of libertarians are overly critical about him. Actually, okay. I've been blocked by people like Steve Crowder because I think Crowder was unfairly critical.
Well, Crowder is not. He's a little too right wing even for me.
Yeah, I mean,
but like my thing is,
yeah.
My thing is, I mean, like most libertarians I know, we actually have heavily critical of people who, like, you know, we get the leftist media and then they're saying things like, "Oh, he puts ketchup on his steak. He's a bad president." And we're like, don't be like, you know, like most libertarians I know of, and I would say I would even go as far to say like every libertarian I know of on a personal level, and I know a lot because I'm involved in that community very heavily.
Yeah.
Hates any what they feel like is a non-legitimate criticism of him. We feel like you need to criticize policies he's doing, things that we feel like incorrect decisions he's making, or even just overall acts of unprofessionalism where we feel like, okay, that's, you know, like reel it in a little bit. Somebody from the chat says you can't be critical enough of who are risen in power. Now I will say, here's my thing. Even when I was a conservative, I used to be very conservative. I actually at one point was I voted for Bush twice. I'm not proud of this. I voted for Bush twice. It was like right when I turned 18. And like I was heavily supportive of Bush. But since then, you know, where I've gotten more perspective and stuff, and I look back, and I mean, I was born in 1985. There's not been a president in my lifetime, and that includes Reagan, where I can look back and be like, yeah, they did good, because I'm pretty overly critical in general, but that's from a libertarian standpoint. I feel like most presidents are do too much of like, and I'll say I'll go back as far as Clinton, because that's most of where I actually started to recognize politics, where I was old enough to. With each president in the U.S., they have like every single election cycle, the power of influence has increased. And I feel like that's the problem I have, is that because, you know, people hated Bush because he did all this bad stuff. And then Obama comes into office, and then he did even more bad stuff. And then Trump, like, it just kind of this level of influence of what the president should and shouldn't be allowed to do kind of keeps expanding. And then it depends on who is in office. They immediately start making excuses. And I noticed this when we went over to Obama, because all these people on the right were like, well, this is good that the president is doing this. And all these people on the left were like, this is bad that the president is doing this. And then I went from a Republican to a Democrat, and everybody's narratives immediately switched. And I was like, wait, what happened, guys? Like, I thought you guys were against this. I thought you guys were for this. Like, what happened? I was very confused. It was very jarring for me because I was still a conservative. And this is actually what kind of took me out of conservatism and started realizing that aligning myself with the right or the left was a little, me personally, wasn't working, because it was like, if you're who you, and this is where I would say, and you know, like if you've been seeing some stuff from libertarians you don't like, I would say just keeping an open mind and possibly being a little bit more like, you're going to see stuff from libertarians you don't like because it's so expansive. I see stuff from libertarians I don't like.
I think your characterizations generally are pretty okay. So like when you say stuff like that, I'm perfectly okay with your characterization of politics and where we're at right now. I think that is perfectly accurate, actually. My big thing is that I stopped. I used to be a big like Ben Shapiro fan. I like the Ben Shapiro wing of the Conservative Party. I like to call them more neocon. Generally, I don't.
No,
I
that's
think
fine.
Ben Shapiro is kind of bordering on the. He's like right on the border.
Yeah, like I think Ben Shapiro, to me, and I don't want to cut you off too much.
No, that's
I would
okay.
say for me, Ben Shapiro, I think is like he makes a lot of like really great points, but he doesn't know when to shut up sometimes.
Yeah.
So you go ahead and finish your point though.
So for me, my biggest problem with libertarians is that I think that a lot of them, and you made a good point that there's a lot of different sects and a lot of different wings of the libertarian movement.
Mm-hmm.
But my problem is generally, you guys tolerate things that I think that if you like, for example, there's the anarchists or whatever what do you call them? Yeah,
ANCAPs.
Yeah, ANCAPs. Yes, them. I'm sorry, I was getting them confused.
No, you're fine.
The ANCAPs.
There's a lot. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the times you guys are very tolerant of their views when it's for me they're a little too over the top radical for that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm as a traditionalist nationalist, I believe that, and I tried making this point. I think it was with who the fuck was it? It was some semi-popular libertarian person, and it descended quickly into madness because all of their followers. It's hard to talk to anyone with a lot of followers, to be honest. But I tried making the point of saying that there's a difference at least for someone of my perspective, there's a difference between big government and a strong government.
Mm-hmm.
So a big government is one that's bloated, wasteful, gets involved in things that don't need to be involved in. And I think for the most part, your typical nationalist, someone, for example, like James Alsup, if you know anything about that guy, I feel like most people
not overly familiar, no.
I know a little bit about him. I kind of share some views with him, but I feel like for the most part, someone like him or someone like me can agree with libertarians that yes, there's a lot of bloat, there's a lot of waste, there's a lot of things that the government's involved in that it doesn't need to be. Mm. However, where I disagree with them is that a lot of libertarians want to shackle the government in ways that I think go too far. So they shackle the government's ability to be strong in law enforcement, to be strong in certain ways that are there to help. Because my view is the purpose of a government is not the purpose of any government is to advance the interests of its people and to protect its citizens.
Okay. I would say
I feel like a lot of libertarian views shackle the government from being able to do that. So the government becomes weak and inefficient. If it's inefficient and weak, other governments can easily trample it. Okay. And that's what you see with the EU.
I will address that. I do want to say, though, in the defense of some of myself and my followers, like literally today I was arguing with somebody who was saying that who was defending us bombing other countries and basically like literally said the entire purpose of the government is to have a monopoly on force and to use that force. So when I start to see certain arguments, sometimes we will behave a certain way and react a certain way because it starts to seem like it's leaning in a specific direction.
That's fair. That's fair.
And this is where I would say, I do appreciate you taking this time to actually come on this stream because I'm like, hey, we can hash this out reasonably. We can talk. Yeah. And get to understand each other better. I don't expect either of us to agree with each other at the end of this discussion.
Maybe not.
I'm sure we'll find common ground. You should be able to find common ground with anybody on something. I'm sure we'll find common ground in something. And I'm not expecting to change your mind. And I hope you don't think you're going to change my mind because I'm stubborn. So
I think most people are naturally stubborn. I think it's good to challenge. Iron sharpens iron, as they say, right?
Wait, what was that?
Iron sharpens iron, as they say.
Yeah. For me, like what I want to get out of this is just to if nothing else, possibly, the best I can do is offer you my personal perspective because, like, that's the thing. And I would say I don't want to say that's the problem with libertarianism, but that's the kind of the catch of libertarianism. Is there are people who are like say they're libertarian and are straight up communists. You know, like, so when you hear somebody say, "Oh, I'm a libertarian," it's you know, you start to have to be like, well, what kind of libertarian are you? Because, you know, I've argued with people who think that who say they're libertarian, and they think that paying rent is actual legitimate theft.
Yeah, yeah. Well, though, like, I don't think anyone could take those kind of people seriously when they say they're libertarian. So for like, here, let me bring up maybe one thing that you can address. So here's something that,
and just real quick, I don't want to say this is what I want to have a discussion, because like it's hard to, on Twitter say like, you're not defending this point well, when I can't, like, I'm not entirely sure which point, and then you only have so many characters, and that's why I really wanted to do a stream where we could actually speak like this.
Perfectly fair. I understand that. I appreciate it too.
Yeah. And like I said, I appreciate you actually coming on, because I offered this to so many people, and typically it's declined. So
I legally can't show
your leaps and bounds against most people. You're already leaps and bounds like ahead of most people I have a debate with on Twitter.
Okay.
Like, so you know.
All right.
If you can offer me some examples that I can either explain or offer my own personal perspective, we don't have to agree, but you can at least understand, maybe.
So, I guess my first thing that I have a problem with most libertarians about is their insistence of that certain choices, my choice, my life, therefore, if it doesn't affect you, it shouldn't be any of your business, correct?
Usually if the choice I make doesn't impact your personal freedom.
Okay, so here is the issue I have with that, and I think there is a solution to it that is more in the middle of between the two than not. But my problem is that a lot of the times I think that a lot of libertarians, and this is most sects of libertarian, I think they ignore the fact that a lot of times, while they will say it doesn't affect other people's lives, it actually does. So for example,
I was going to say, offer me one example, so I can.
I'll give you. I have two examples, but I'll use this simpler one because I think it's a smaller microcosm of the whole thing. If you're, let's say, a private insurance company gives insurance. And you decide to be extremely unhealthy with your life decisions. And as a result, you have to you go blind. And you're like 40, 50 years old. So therefore, you don't really have a lot of time left in your life to learn all kinds of new things, learn how to sign language, learn all that. Who are you affecting? Because you're not going to be able to work because you've lost all the skills that you originally had been able to do. So now you have to put yourself on the public dollar, because let's all be honest, like, people often say, well, charity. Well, that's just not a reality in the world we live in right now. Charity can help, but as long as there's and I think Ann Coulter actually said this very well. She says, as long as there's a welfare state, libertarian ideals cannot be implemented, because that person I'm paying for, their life decision negatively impacted me. That's why, like, people are like, legalize all drugs. I am open to the idea of marijuana. I'm open to it. I'm not for legalization as of yet. I still think that there's got to be more research done and more observations done before we take a dive.
Okay.
But legalization of drugs, they say all drugs. Well, shit, I don't want my money going towards paying this person. Now, also, if that person, if those drugs negatively impact them to the point where they go, effing psycho, and they go and slaughter my daughter or hit my daughter and stuff like that, that's not just impacting your life at that point. You're impacting all of society, because we have to pay for you. We have to live with the consequences of your actions. Yeah. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, and I 100% understand your argument. I would like to first address the insurance one. Like, me personally, I'm actually against insurance as a whole. Because for me, like, it started off where its heart was in the right place. It's turned more into like kind of a Ponzi scheme. There are actually places already currently in the United States that, like, clinics you can go to, and I can't remember what they're actually called off the top of my head, and it's late for me. And if like, seriously, if you
remind me, I can give you some links later.
Oh no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, they're actually like, they don't accept insurance at all, and instead, what they do, it's kind of like a almost like a membership you pay to this specific location, and then you go there and you get your stuff taken care of when you need it. And then actually, like, even with just paying your membership fees and stuff like that, and not having insurance and still paying for your medications and stuff, it actually comes out significantly cheaper, because without insurance, it actually doesn't drive up. Because like a lot of the reason hospital costs get so out of hand is because it's going
to have to accept people. Yes.
Yeah. Like my wife, and here's a good, like, my wife is actually a mental health therapist. She doesn't accept insurance. Like she flat out won't accept insurance. If you can't afford to pay, she uses a sliding scale, and she tries to work with the person. But she has a huge problem with insurance, because insurance companies, you have to have a specific diagnosis for the insurance company to pay. And then a lot of times she feels that, like, either she's actually flat out said to be able to treat somebody, certain people, she would actually have to lie in order to get insurance to pay for it. And she's like, okay, ethically, that doesn't feel right. Like, I feel like there's a lot of problems with insurance. I'm not saying my solution is completely perfect, but I'm I do feel like we can move towards alternatives to kind of get away from that, where you do actually become a lot more responsible for yourself, where, you being an you being reckless, being irresponsible, things like that, you become more responsible for those actual costs of like how it affects your life. And then if like you could still have insurance for things of people where they actually do high risk jobs and stuff, maybe, or high risk activities, like you could have something, insurance for that or something. And here's what I want to say too, like, I can't perfectly speak, like I can give you ideas and like kind of offer maybe some balance, like they're like, I'm not saying everything I say is the perfect solution. I'm saying that we can move towards a like more what I feel like, and what from the stuff I've read and from the discussions I've had with people, like move towards a more neutral ground on a lot of things, where it doesn't feel like it's it's not everybody necessarily sharing a load. It's you do actually start to take on a lot more of your personal responsibility, because if we actually move to something like that, kind of think of, if it wasn't a matter of, if I, break my leg, everybody else is going to help pay for it. If I break my leg, I have to pay for it. You start to be a little bit more careful. You start to take care of yourself more. You start to worry about your personal health and well-being. Something I've seen a lot is and I'm a veteran, and, I've talked to a lot of veterans who start taking a medication and it negatively affects them. But then they have no idea what the medication does and why they're even taking it. They just took it because the doctor did. And I'm like, well, you have a responsibility as the patient to make sure what me personally, if my doctor gives me a medication, I research the hell out of it before I start taking it. I actually call that I call the pharmacist so much, because they're able to pull up my entire medication list. I'm like, hey, is this going to interact with anything I'm on? We've actually caught stuff before where they were putting me on a medication to like reduce something, and another medication they had me on would actually increase the same thing. And I was like, how does that make any sense? And we were able to catch that. It's a lot of personal responsibility. And I feel like that's something, and I will get to your drug argument in a second, but I would say as far as like a lot of things like insurance and things like that go, I do feel like we could possibly move more towards things where like the concept of personal responsibility comes more to the forefront. For the drug thing, I'm more of a legalize it person, and I don't want to go too much into the debate of whether it's okay to legalize it or not. I feel like that's kind of something for a whole nother discussion.
That's a very long.
I do understand. It gets very in depth.
But I think a lot of libertarians just dismiss people who don't want. They dismiss their concerns. They're like, oh yeah, you guys are just statists. Well, and it's like I don't deny being a statist, but I don't like the idea that people automatically assume that all statism is necessarily wrong. And I think a lot of libertarians tend to go a little extreme on that.
Well, it's a very common, but I also think, like, and I'll say in defense of libertarians, we hear a lot of the same arguments so when you kind of get a lot of like, and I will say, like your specific argument against why you're not okay with legalizing drugs is more reasonable than I would say 95% of the things I hear, because typically when I hear an argument against drugs, it's just that, you know, it's either like, you know, the state, you know, people can't take care of themselves, or people like can't be trusted with themselves kind of argument, or it's a lot of propaganda about like, you know, like a lot of my arguments against with marijuana is that like, oh, this person smoked marijuana and they overdosed. And it's like, you can't actually overdose on marijuana. Like, you know, like you start to deal with a lot of that stuff and you're like, okay, either this person's being fed false information or they're deliberately lying. Like it,
or you know, both sides I think tend to, and then also with the drugs thing is it's like, it's hard to get into details about a drug that is not as thoroughly researched as some other drugs we have on the market right now, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and I have my problems with the FDA, but I would be far more understanding of legalizing marijuana if we had more time. Because my biggest problem is that through the 50s and 60s, we had all this push by companies, by big multinational corporations to say, listen, smoking has some health benefits. We do know that there are some risks, but we're not 100% sure on them. But here's some of the health benefits. And then less than, what was it, like 10 years later, the actual research comes out that wasn't funded by these pharmaceutical companies and these tobacco companies, and lo and behold, look at all these things, and now we have to do what it hasn't been since the 70s. It's been fucking 60 years.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
No, I know what you mean.
50 years, 60 years, whatever. It's been however many years since then that we've been trying to break an entire generation, and not just an entire generation, but successive generations of a horrible drug that has done nothing but cause problems for our society.
Yeah.
And for me, society is incredibly important. I worry that if we go down that same path with marijuana, there may be, you know, marijuana may have more benefits than detriments. However, I want to be 100% sure before we go down that path. Okay. I used to be very, very pro legalization, but one person that actually made me not necessarily question it, but be more cautious about it is Peter Hitchens. Okay. He had a talk called "The War We Never Fought," and it was at the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. I think it was back in 2013.
Okay.
That 1 hour talk gave me enough skepticism to say, whoa, let's pump the brakes a little bit. And so I'm not someone who says let's not do it, but let's pump the brakes and not go rushing headlong into something we are not 100% sure of yet. That's my biggest complaint on that. But I don't want to get too deep in the weeds with it.
Yeah, and I understand your point of view. I actually, like, it was the opposite for me. I used to be, like, super hardcore against marijuana. And, like, the more I looked into it and the more I became scared, I was like, okay, like, I feel like there's a lot of misinformation about, there's a lot of, like, paranoia that's out there, too. And I feel like there's a lot of, like, for me, like, Jeff Sessions, some of the stuff he says just drives me nuts. Because I feel like it's just straight up, like, just lies half the time. But, like, one of my things is marijuana. Yes. Like, for me, marijuana is, like, significantly safer than a lot of other substances out there that people could be doing. And, you know, everybody usually calls marijuana, like, the gateway drug. But there's actually a whole lot of studies out there showing that it's actually helped people come off of really hard substances because they didn't have those, like, horrific withdrawals, and like, it gave them something safer to kind of, like, pull themselves away from that and kind of stuff like that. And I do feel like, that's probably, like, a lot of those details could be saved for another debate. But
absolutely,
like, and I get it. Like, I understand your point of, like, you know, like, somebody kind of getting high on heroin and then like starting to do something crazy, you know, because of the drug, and like, like them doing something negatively to somebody else would violate that person's rights. I do understand your perspective on that, and I'm do want to acknowledge it, and there's no misunderstanding on my behalf.
Okay.
I would say that, like, for me, when it comes to a lot of illegal substances, like, I think it'd be helpful if we can find a middle ground here, that I think something we could at least both agree on is, as a society, pushing more towards not stigmatizing it as much, and be more towards wanting to help people find rehabilitation, as opposed to flat out locking them in jail and ruining their lives forever.
Yeah.
And just for trying it or getting hooked on it and being addicted to it,
Yeah.
helping them get off of it. Because typically you're going to throw this person in jail, they're going to head down a way worse path than what they were on before.
That's a mixed bag there, and I generally agree with you there. I think that the biggest problem is that it's not just a problem with, you know, sending them to jail. That's not necessarily 100% problem. The problem is that we've let our jails go out of control too. So it's a mixed thing.
No, and that's I have a feeling on our jail thing would probably find some common ground there too. I don't want to go too far down to that rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's a very big rabbit hole.
I would say, and I gotta actually probably sign off. So let's say, if you don't mind, I'll let you bring up maybe one more point that we can address and discuss for a minute. And then, if you don't mind, I would actually like to have you come back on sometime and like on a more scheduled time where we have more time and maybe plan this out more. I actually really appreciate these kinds of discussions, and I think us not agreeing is totally fine, and us leaving this not agreeing is totally fine. But us being able to have this discussion and at least be able to understand each other, I feel like is not just important for like the both sides, but for the people watching too. To at least be like, okay, this is what this side thinks. This is what this side thinks. Establishing this,
it's fair.
So
I would absolutely be willing to do that. As long as it's scheduled and whatnot. I'm a busy person, and by the way,
and I understand. I am too.
Service, I am actually in the service as well. So,
and then if you don't mind, like, because you said you were from South Korea.
I'm currently living in South Korea with my wife.
Okay. Where are you from originally? Are you originally from America?
I'm from the North Midwest. I'm from Minnesota. So.
Okay. Cool. Are you stationed in South Korea then? Is that
yeah, but I'm probably gonna be here for a very long time.
Okay.
Just due to the nature of my job.
I don't expect you to go into too much detail about your personal. Like I said, let's have you bring up maybe one more point that we could have. I would say at most maybe 10-minute back and forth, and then I probably got to sign off.
No, that's fine. I understand it's late for you guys over there.
It's 1 o'clock in the morning now. So.
Oh yeah, man. I understand the struggles of having to stay up late and shit.
And I got two kids that are going to be waking me up in like 5 hours.
I have a 2-year-old, so I know it. Here's my I guess this is my other big one. Libertarians on taxation.
Yes.
So
real quick, actually. I would put a pin in this one because I'm actually going to be having an entire taxation live stream on Monday that I would suggest you watch that one first.
Okay.
And then I would have you come on maybe later where we can further discuss it because things I'm going to be talking about are what people feel like taxes they would be willing to keep and taxes they would want to get if they could pick one, things like that. So I would actually rather put a pin in that because on Monday I'm going to be having a whole stream on this, and I think that would actually probably I feel like you're definitely not going to agree with everything you hear on that stream, but it would definitely give you an insight. Yeah, it would definitely give you an insight that would probably be a good launching point for a stream where you and me can have a more in-depth debate specifically about taxation.
That'd be cool. Yeah, I can wait on that. Let me bring up this one then. Foreign wars. Libertarians tend to go a little bit extreme for me on this. Now, let me preface this in saying that I'm against the Iraq-Afghanistan wars. I was against most of the Middle Eastern wars. However, libertarians tend to go very extreme where they'll say, I'm against those wars, but I'm also against every other war that we've basically been involved. And I have my criticisms of war we've been involved in the past. But I don't agree that every war we've ever been involved when it comes to international dealings has been wrong.
Yeah.
And I think the main reason I say that is because I don't think the U.S. has to be isolationist, and I don't think that our history even correlates with this idea that we were ever really isolationist to begin with.
Mhm.
I think a few of our founders were saying, let's try to keep our feet out of international wars as much as possible. But throughout all of our history, even very early into our country's history, we are very much involved internationally. It was the way we got involved was different, and I think that's where libertarians get a little bit mixed up on, is that they tend to do that.
Do you know? Do you understand the term minarchist at all?
I've seen it around. I haven't had a chance to look on it because that's a relatively newer term.
Yeah. What I consider, like, I have friends that are ANCAPs that are very anarcho-capitalists. I have friends that are straight anarchists. Myself, I tend to call myself a minarchist with ANCAP tendencies, because I even if I don't even fully agree with it, I can actually argue the philosophy of ANCAP very well. Even if I don't actually agree with it, I understand it enough that I can argue on their behalf. Minarchist is more of like the idea that you're just very minimal government. Like you're not anarchist. Like you're not no government is good. You're more of like, okay, there are legitimate uses for the government. It's more about just keeping the government in check and as small as possible to where it cannot be abused. Okay. So that's more where I fall in line. I actually do believe the military is one of the few like very extremely legit reasons to have a government. It's hard to maintain like a functioning military without something like a government. I disagree on funding, how we fund it, how much it should be funded, and things like that. And that's a whole nother story.
So those are minute details. That's not the overall.
And like myself being a veteran, like I'm not against the concept of a military. I'm more against, how those militaries get used. I do think there are conflicts we have been in that, were either almost impossible to avoid or not necessarily bad. I think pretty much just like the way we use the military, I feel like I have an issue with, because, and this is where a lot of libertarians have an issue with, is, we go over, there's a leader in a Middle Eastern country, we don't like him. We send our military over to train a bunch of people to depose the military. And then 3 months later, we're fighting those people that we trained and gave a bunch of weapons to, like that's happened so many times.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I do feel like we tend to create our worst enemies overseas a lot. And the past, 15, 20 years, it's happened so many times. And I feel like that's, honestly, I think it would actually be really good to, because I would have to pick their brains. I'm not really sure what a general consensus on like previous wars is. That's something I would actually be interested in having a whole stream on, with bringing a bunch of libertarians on and being like, which wars would you say are justified and which ones weren't? But I would say most of libertarianism, like anti-war stuff is just what we're doing over in the Middle East mostly. Going in to depose a leader, it's mostly because I do feel like, and this is me personally, from what I've seen, a lot of our conflicts overseas become more political than humanitarian, and it's to depose a certain leader that we don't like. We're training a bunch of people, and then we have to go back and fight those people because they turned around and became the bad guys.
Yeah.
I
think I get your general understanding of it. I would be curious to hear what other, and I would like to question other libertarians.
No, I mean that's
on
that.
Point, but I think I generally agree with you on that. I think that's a good way to leave it off. I don't want to keep you up too much later, man.
Yeah, no, and that is a good way to leave it off. And like I said, you know what, if some of the things we talked about, because I'm like, you bring up questions, like I can't speak on behalf of all libertarians, obviously, and I don't think you expect me to, but I can offer my personal view as a libertarian, and you bring up questions that I'm like, hey, maybe I should get some libertarians on, and we'll have this discussion to kind of get a general consensus on what Maybe, I can get an anarchist, an ANCAP, a minarchist, and get these different sects on to debate it too, of being like, hey, how do you think? Yeah, that would actually be a really good concept.
So I like that, and I think I will definitely tune into that kind of stuff. One thing I will say is that if the libertarian, and this is just what I want to, this is my final thought. If the libertarian, and this is my biggest problem with the libertarian, I want more parties in America. I'm not one of those, hey, we need 2 parties. I do think 2 parties tends to be a little bit more basic for the average voter. However, I do want more parties in America. I think that the Libertarian Party has a lot of potential. I think the way they direct their energy is flawed, because they're not creating a consensus between all their factions. They're not creating a ground movement, and instead they're always focused on the national scene. Hey, let's get the president, let's get the senatorial
actually
seat.
What you just said.
That's flawed.
It's actually a point of contention in the libertarian community. A lot of people don't like the way the Libertarian National Party does things. A lot of people are like, hey, we need to be able to come together. There's actually a lot of infighting, and a lot of libertarians will actually flat out admit the Libertarian Party is just a mess sometimes, because we're too stubborn in our own beliefs and not willing to build some bridges here and there. So you have a valid criticism there, I will say.
Okay,
but and I want to say, and you said Lewis is what I should call you, right?
Yeah, that's just the username I use.
And no, that's fine. I'm gonna, I followed you on Twitter. I'm gonna, I'm not gonna unfollow you. I'm gonna keep that bridge built. I would love to have you back on. I do want to say before, I close it out, thank you for actually coming on. I offer this to so many people, and hey, if you want to come on, let's have this discussion. You're probably the first person ever to be like, yeah, let's do that. And I will say, I'm very abrasive on Twitter. That's the persona I maintain, because it's sarcasm.
I wasn't upset, by the way. I wasn't freaking out or anything like that. I was just
I appreciate that. It
is very difficult, though. I will say this: it's frustrating when I try and make a point, but the problem is that when you have 6 other people commenting, it's hard to keep a cohesive.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to keep your mind straight. So sometimes it can come off wrong, and I apologize if I came off.
It's fine. It's fine. No, water under the bridge, dude.
Anyways, I appreciate the time. I got to get going just because my wife is going to be calling.
Sounds good. And then thank everybody who is watching. Thank you. And then I'm actually going to give you a shout out on Twitter.
You could just do it on Gab. I'm moving to Gab anyways.
I don't have Gab. I need to do that.
I got Gab finally. So
I highly appreciate it. I do appreciate you coming on. And
if you go to my Twitter, though, you'll see my Gab username. So
okay, fantastic. Yeah. All right. Have a good night or good day.
Yeah, appreciate it. You have a nice night, and get some sleep. Those kids.
All right.
See you, man.